Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
You have declared a jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the U.S.
Is the jihad directed against the U.S. government or United States troops in Arabia? What about U.S. civilians in Arabia or the people of the United States?
We have focused our declaration of jihad on striking at the U.S. soldiers inside Arabia, the country of the two holy places, Mecca and Medina. In our religion, it is not permissible for any non-Muslim to stay in Arabia. Therefore, even though American civilians are not targeted in our plan, they must leave. We do not guarantee their safety.
Submit to Islam or die. The Jihad Mind. Welcome back to Truth Thursday here on the Rob Maness Show, and we're live on Worldview Tube and X Spaces simulcast. Well, jihadi fighters and the tribal cultures they come from are brutal. They have no regard for human life in their war, civilian or otherwise. This is why we witnessed the atrocities on October 7th, 2023 in Israel. Publicly broadcast beheadings of prisoners by ISIS in the past, dragging broken bodies of women and children through the streets, and the execution of hostages when the prospect of their rescue increases and becomes imminent. Here is a glimpse of how they see their war or jihad against the West, and I quote, "Our enemies are determined. They will utilize every tool at their disposal and have a strong devotion to what they believe is their God-commanded goal of establishing a global Islamic government known as the Caliphate." Close quote. That's right. Every tool available, no matter how brutal or barbaric. This is why we must have strong leaders and warriors in our midst, because this enemy must be defeated soundly. Listen to this quote. Quote, "A Taliban leader once told me, 'You have me in a cage. My fight is over for now, but my children will fight you. And if they don't win, their children will fight you. If it takes 1,000 years, we will win.'" Close quote. Well, my guest today is the man that wrote that in his new book, If It Takes 1,000 Years. Former Army Captain Jesse Petria has traveled worldwide on fact-finding missions, researching the mindset of the jihadists and the policies that enable them. He served as a civilian advisor to the U.S. Department of State and was a liaison officer in the Army to the Afghan secret police, facilitating the interrogations of over 400 captured Taliban and Al-Qaeda members. Jesse, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Hey, it's good to see you, my friend. Look, the book is fascinating. I did the speediest of reading on it. It's fantastic, folks. You got to go get it. You can find it on Amazon, and Jesse will talk more about that. But the quotes I just read there are both from your book. I was very interested because you tell the story about your first impressions when you get on the ground in a country like Afghanistan, and you're coming in contact with this tribalism combined with religious zealotry.
Right.
How did you feel? Tell the audience a bit about how you felt and what your impressions were immediately.
Well, it's another world, and I think that's what people don't understand, is that their mindset is fundamentally different than that of those in the West. These people fight generational wars, as was mentioned in the quote that you gave from the book, where the Taliban commander said, look, we're going to fight for 1,000 years. If it takes 1,000 years, we're going to destroy you. And they don't think in terms of an immediate victory. They think incrementally, just a very long 1,000 years in the past, 1,000 years in the future. If people think this conflict started in 1948 with Israel, they're absolutely mistaken. I mean, Israel had nothing to do with the 300 children that were murdered in Beslan in Russia. They didn't have anything to do with the Ottomans marauding through Europe. They didn't have anything to do with the Moors trying to take over the Iberian Peninsula. I mean, this is something that's been going on for since the beginning. And if they think it's going to stop at Israel, that's their biggest mistake, is that Israel is fighting the battles for us on behalf of the West. And people really need to understand that. I mean, just an example about their determination of the jihadists, there was another Taliban member that I met. Half of his face was blown off. And I looking at him, and I realized, this looks like it happened a while ago. And I said, hey, when did this happen? When did half your face get blown off? And he said it happened fighting the Russians. And I'm thinking, this was 23 years after the end of the Soviet-Afghan war, and somebody in that shape was still fighting the infidels, still fighting the jihad, and just, I mean, that's something that would just, if we're in a war and something like that happens, we're happily collecting disability at home playing video games and hanging out with the family. Whereas for them, they're like zombies. They just keep coming, and it's just this battle where they don't care if they die, and that's one of the fundamental differences.
What is it about the tribes and the religion that wraps people up in this so that they have that perspective instead of, like in the West, take for instance the American Revolution. We fought the British, we kicked them out. We give them grief about it. Even today, we make jokes with our British friends and those kind of things, and still give them a little bit of grief. But we also have a the closest of close relationships from an allied perspective now that doesn't seem possible with this type of thought process and mindset.
No, it's very different. There was one on that subject. There was one of the Afghans that I was assigned to liaison to that was part of this the secret police. It was called the NDS, the National Directorate of Security. That was the equivalent of the KGB of the Taliban, or not of the Taliban, rather, of the previous Afghan government. And they were going after the Taliban, and so these guys were as allied as can be with us. They were part of the government there, and I talked to their colonel that was in charge of doing the interrogations against the Taliban, and I asked him, I was just drinking tea with him, hanging out at one point, and I said, I've got to ask you. I mean, it says, to kill apostates, to murder apostates, and I listed a few other things, and he got very offended because he's a Muslim guy. I said, you're a rational guy. You're wearing a suit and working with the Western governments. You couldn't possibly believe that, could you? And he said, absolutely. He said, he said, those are man's laws that say not to kill apostates, but it's God's law that says you have to. Who are you to argue with God's law? And this was one of the supposed allies. And so this just demonstrates, it's rooted so deep into the culture and into the belief system. And that wasn't the first time somebody said that to me. I've had several people on the jihadist side quote things and say these are God's laws and who are you to argue with it. And so that's what we're up against. And it's so intertwined specifically in Afghanistan with the tribal culture as well, that isn't just religious, but it's such a great fit. And there's so many differences there that we just fundamentally do not understand, because Islam came from a tribal society. And so and tribal societies in the last 1400 years came from Islam. And so it's very much they've grown together over the last millennia and a half. For example, there's some pretty crazy things. The Nuristani tribe up in northern Afghanistan, they have requirements to be the equivalent of a city council member. To be a village elder, it has 3 requirements. You have to be a good orator. You need to be able to speak well. You have to entertain the village 10 times at a banquet. So, I mean, okay, some people could check that. And then the third one is you have to murder 5 enemies. And so you have rules like that are so ingrained, that have been passed down for centuries, that it's like, I mean, I served on a city council in Southern California at one point, and I'm pretty glad that I didn't have to murder 5 people next door to get elected there. But that's so ingrained and it's just, and they don't need great technologies. They'll use everything. If we give them technologies, they use it against us. But I'll tell you, there was just how primitive some of the Taliban were that were brought to us. There was one guy, it was fascinating. In the middle of an interrogation, he stops the interrogator, and he says, "Excuse me," he's talking through the translator. He says, "What is that stick that you have in your hand?" He had never seen a pen before in his life. And these are the types of people that we're trying to teach Western democratic Republican style government, and that we expected to, or I should say, the insiders in the Beltway and in cubicles expected them to run with. And so that's why it failed in Afghanistan. That's why it failed in Iraq. I mean, if you give them the vote, they vote for Sharia law.
Yeah, and by the time we got to Afghanistan, I mean, we had already been through Bosnia, and there's a Muslim aspect to that conflict in the former Yugoslavia that goes back centuries, right?
Right, and I spent a great deal of time.
Why aren't we more prepared for what we saw in Afghanistan?
We've dealt with these societies enough that we should learn, but the problem is that we don't. And the bureaucrats in D.C. only care about keeping their jobs. They don't care about winning wars, and the electeds only care about getting reelected. So they only think generally 2 years at a time, or maybe 4 if it's a president, but they don't usually think beyond that. Now, Bosnia is a little bit of a different animal, because they were under the communists for so long that they weren't very religious. But what happened was, when the lid was taken off, they still had an Islamic history. And what happened was it was so predictable, because you had a blank slate. And you had Islamic groups from the peninsula that came in there, and now they started building madrasas, and they started educating them to what the fundamentalists actually believe. And I mean, when you get down to it, the fundamentalist aspects are I mean, they look at it, they justify it with Quranic verses, and they're starting to get more and more radicalized. There's even charities that are set up in Bosnia that pay these people that for several generations actually became very secular. They're now paying their families to grow a beard, to wear the longer shorts, to make their women wear a hijab, and so there's actually charities that encourage folks to live a more fundamentalist Islamic life. And not only that, there's so much money coming out of the peninsula that are radicalizing the kids, and they always get to the kids. And that's the thing, is that they think so long term, and that's one thing that we really missed in Afghanistan, is that we could have taken over the schools. We could have only allowed state schools. We could have tried to influence as much as we can next door in Pakistan, where many of the madrasas were, to just say, look, we're going to create a generation of secular people. That is, if we were going to stay there. I don't think we should have. I think that we should have bombed the heck out of the bad guys and gotten out of there. because frankly, I mean, the military has no business doing nation building in Islamic countries. It just, we don't understand how they think, and they respond to force, and they hit us, we hit them 10 times harder, and that's what they respond to.
Yeah, we're in total agreement on that. Once we had our victory, we should have just handed it back over to the locals and said, hey, you guys need to figure out what you're going to do. But if this happens anymore, we'll be back. Well, when we come back from this break, Jesse, I'm going to show a propaganda video. It's a little cartoony one, but it's a propaganda to propagandize the non-Islamic West into believing something that's not completely true. And I want to get your comments on it. So we'll be right back with Army veteran Jesse Petria, author of If It Takes 1,000 Years, here on Truth Thursday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
The word jihad is an Arabic word which simply means to struggle or to strive in the way of God. In Islam, there are two kinds of jihad, which are termed the lesser jihad and the greater jihad. The lesser jihad is that struggle which is fighting in self-defense, and in self-defense only, against those who have harmed them and tried to deprive them from religion and God. At the time of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, the Muslims were persecuted for a long period of 13 years. They were stoned, whipped, tortured, and boycotted in various ways, but bore through this hardship with patience until God had finally allowed the Muslims to defend themselves against the violent crimes of the opposers. It was a temporary command for the Muslim people. What's interesting, though, is that when God allowed the Muslims to fight, it was only to create a peaceful society that would grant each religion liberty to practice and preach its own way of life. As we see in the Holy Quran, chapter 22, verse 41, "And if Allah did not repel some men by means of others, there would surely have been destroyed cloisters and churches and synagogues and mosques, wherein the name of God is oft commemorated. And God will surely help one who helps him. God is indeed powerful, mighty." Even when they had to fight, Muslims were under strict command of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that they were never to be more unjust than the opposing army, were never to harm women and children, and places of religious worship. When we study the history of Islam, we see that Muslims never attacked on the offensive, but only in self-defense, and in many cases demonstrated mercy and forgiveness on those who were unjust to their own civil liberties. Jihad is not a war to spread Islam, kill innocent people, and be involved in terrorist activities. The Holy Quran has very clearly stated in chapter 2, verse 257, that there is no compulsion in religion.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and we're talking about jihadism and Islam. And the title of this show says what I've learned about Islam since I was a boy: submit or die. That is a fact of life in the Muslim world. And we just talked about the apostates being killed and those kinds of things. And you saw at the beginning of the show Osama bin Laden talking to a CNN reporter about why he's declared a jihad, and that even civilians should not be in the Arabian Peninsula because that's where Medina and Mecca are, and those infidels should not be there. So if they're there, even if they're not shoulders, our jihad will probably end their lives. My guest today is Jesse Petrillo, the author of If It Takes 1,000 Years. Jesse's an Army veteran that did over 400 interrogations of Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. So he's got a unique perspective, and very few people have written about that much information that they got firsthand from people like we were fighting in Afghanistan and are fighting around the world today. And Jesse, that video is, I called it a propaganda video because everything, all the way down to the young man's voice in that video, misinforms about the Islamist fundamentalist approach to jihad, to Christianity and Judaism. I mean, it wants you to believe that they're peace-loving people that have no intent of spreading jihadism and Islamism around the world by force if necessary. Have no, they aren't brutal. They don't act like they live in the 7th century, and they don't want Sharia law. I mean, all of those things. That's what comes out of that video to me. From your experience, and you've got a lot more firsthand experience than I do with this this issue. How did that hit you?
Well, I didn't know this was a comedy show. I mean, the jihad means struggle as much as gay means happy. I mean, it nowadays it just completely has a fundamentally different meaning. I mean, it's saying that that's what the jihadists are for is like saying the Democrats believe in liberalism. I mean, there's certain words that have been changed over the years, and so we're not Islamophobes by saying that they're quoting scripture and doing this and being justified by the Quran. They're the ones who are saying it. That's the biggest thing, is that this book, I put very little commentary in it. I'm just saying, hey, this is what they say. Make your own assumptions, and we're all going to come to the same conclusions. And that's just it, is that these are firsthand experiences. And I just tried to write down as much as I could while I was there. If you want to read it, it's on Amazon. If It Takes 1,000 Years, please also follow me on X at Jesse Petrillo. But this is the thing, is that they're going after each generation. In fact, the Taliban largely comes from the Islamic schools. They're almost exclusively I'll tell you, out of all 400 interrogations, what you do is you drink your tea with them and you're chatting and you're saying, you're talking about their upbringing and getting to know them, and every single one of them came from a madrasa. They spent their time in a Taliban-operated madrasa. And so these are the Islamic schools. In fact, Taliban is the Pashto word. Talib means student. Taliban is Pashto for students. And so they're always coming after the next generation, and they're coming after our kids too. We saw what happened on the college campuses, and they're doing endowments to Middle East. These are from the charities out of the Arabian Peninsula are doing endowments for Middle East studies programs. They're publishing slick propaganda videos to try to get to kids, and because they understand with this generational war mindset that if they can get to the next voter block, if they can incrementally change the way the Western world operates and thinks, it's one step closer to establishing that global caliphate. And so as disjointed as all of the various jihadist movements are, they're all focused on the same goal, and that is establishing a global Islamic government under Sharia law. And we need to make no mistake of that.
Yeah, and you learned a lot about Sharia law and how families work in these direct personal interactions. Did you get? I mean, what was your take on the relationship between fathers, wives, daughters, sons, brothers, sisters, grandchildren, and how that worked in these jihadist families? Because they are jihad. I mean, every one of them I think, are Taliban or Al Qaeda jihadists in the country of Afghanistan. Quite frankly,
it's definitely not the dynamic that we would think, and that's one of the most sinister things that was ever told to me in one of those interrogations was when I was asking about their family, and one of the Taliban just very nonchalantly said, "Oh, I have 5 kids. I had 6, but my daughter dishonored the family, so I killed her." Just very casually, very, very matter of fact, and that kind of mindset, it shocks us so much, but it's unfortunately just so commonplace in that part of the world. And so if a girl is caught with a boy, or even just kissing a boy or anything like that, it's with a boyfriend, that's it. She's got a death sentence from the family more than likely. And if the counter though, if a son goes to strap on a bomb and blows himself up in a marketplace or in a government building or in a school. I mean, this is a school for women. I mean, if there's something that happens like that, the parents are saying, "Oh, this is so great. He was a martyr. How wonderful!" And they just don't value the lives as long as it's for advancing their ideology. I mean, they would deliberately. We would get indirect fire occasionally into the base, and it's set up to do return artillery fire. There's sensors that can triangulate where it came from, and they regularly would set up these mortars on a populated building. And one time they set it up on a school, and they killed a whole bunch of kids. And next thing you know, they're on the TV saying, "Oh, look at the terrible Americans! They've killed all these kids." It's like, yeah, the Taliban set up the mortars on the top of on the roof, and so it's they're and that's another thing. It's a tool they're using is our media. They're using the public opinion. They're trying to they find ways to exploit this, and even if they just do their own sliver of the pie and incrementally chip away at it, that's what they're doing. And I mean, we are so unprepared. I think, especially the next generation, to understand how they think. And that's what's so scary is the young kids right now. I think the post 9/11 generation, we have absolutely failed in educating them the mindset of the reasons why they did this and what they think. And so if you have kids, if you're listening to this and you have teenagers or a young adult, especially if they're in school, pick up the phone, go to Amazon, type in "If It Takes 1,000 Years," buy my book. It's an easy read as a gift. Get it for your kids. Get it for young folks that you know. This thing, it should be mandatory reading in colleges, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that cartoon I just showed, that's aimed at American kids. You know, that's one of the reasons why we have Hamas-loving university students that are American supporting atrocities against the Jewish people that we haven't seen since World War II. It's crazy out there. Well, we do have a live audience, Jesse, and I do take a question from there occasionally. We've got a hand up. My host over there is Shell. Shell, who's got a question for Jesse?
We have AJ, sir.
Thank you so much, Shell, Colonel. Jesse, it's great to hear your voice. I have a question, and that is, did you at any point during your interrogations or your contact with the Taliban ever see any sort or hear any sort of narrative in which it justified their interaction or connection with the Russians, either be it in Soviet or post-Soviet era, considering that there was a time where Taliban wouldn't even brush shoulders with, quote, godless communists, so to speak. With that, I yield. Thank you.
No, but what I did see is that the West had certainly there were a lot of them that gained the training, especially the older ones that gained the training from us to fight the Russians without us realizing that, hey, we're next in line. And so this is there were a lot of folks that honed their skills fighting against them. The only ones that I saw that had worked with the Russians were some of the interrogators. Some of the older interrogators that I worked with were actually had been members of the KGB in the previous times. So if you remember, if you're aware, the government that was in Afghanistan that sparked the Soviet Afghan war was being propped up by the Russians. So it was a Soviet government, and so within that government you had Afghans, you had communist Afghans that were not religious, and they were fighting against the jihadists, and so some of them were still around. They were the older generation, but as far as the current ones, I didn't see Russia having their hand there too much. I mean, they learned their lesson. They understand how these folks think, and I don't think they're going to waste their time doing anything but fighting them. And so I mean, you look at the separatist movements in Russia that are going on in Dagestan or Chechnya, and I mean, it's been. I mean, you look at Beslan that I mentioned earlier, where they murdered around 300 children. It's just nauseating, and for us to think that's not going to happen, or there's going to be any difference, they don't look at us as different. There's two in their belief that's very well stated. They believe there's two places in the world. There's Dar al-Islam, the land of Islam, and there's Dar al-Harb, the land of war. And so it's one or the other. It's either one place that's been conquered, that's submitted, or it's the land that they're fighting against. And that's what the jihadists believe. And Russia falls into that. We fall into that. Europe falls into that. And so we're all in this battle together. And that's I mean, we really need to realize that.
Yeah, we are, and you mentioned that the post 9/11 generation had failed, and I would posit you're going to see a video clip of an American general coming back in from this break, Jesse, that I want to get your comments on, because this is the exact type of leadership and failure to learn about the jihadists that is going to get us in serious trouble if we don't change our ways. We'll be right back with Jesse Petrillo, author of If It Takes 1,000 Years and the Jihadist Mindset, right here on Truth Thursday on Worldview 2.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
But Kamala Harris would be just the opposite. Why? Because she's an inspiration. Not only is she positive, and does she bring hope and optimism, but as a black woman, the product of a mixed marriage, she will inspire millions of people throughout the world. Our credibility as a nation, that we would be able to allow, our country is so great that we're allowed a woman like that to become the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. That is going to send a powerful message all over the world. People like Vladimir Putin are going to say, hey, wait a minute. These guys, they truly have a democratic country. They truly are representative. They truly are fighting for all their people. And Kamala Harris is a manifestation of that.
To the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and we're talking about the jihadist mindset with the author of If It Takes 1,000 Years, Army veteran, and really he's got a lot more experience than just in the Army. He's worked with the State Department, amongst many other things. Jesse Petrillo is with us today. And Jesse, There was a little bit that I left off of that clip that talked about the jihad, but that's an American Army general, and he has it's recent, obviously, and so obviously he has been in command in Afghanistan of some unit. I'm not sure which one, because I've talked to people that worked in that command, and that is the exact type of reverse lesson that I think is going to get us in trouble. Do you think a jihadi country leader is going to cower in the face of having to stand up to Kamala Harris?
Well, you know, the senior Taliban commander that I mentioned earlier that had half his face blown off, that was still fighting the infidels 23 years after that happened. I'm sure that he was probably given some top Taliban cabinet position somewhere, and I'm sure he's going to see if Kamala wins. Oh, it's okay now. It's all right. They are awesome. They elected a black woman as president, as if they care about that. I mean, it's just complete ludicrousness. I don't know. It's very dangerous. I would think that it's born in ignorance, but it's not for people at that level. And that's what's scary, is there are people out there that are deliberately deceiving people for whatever reason. Now, I think the vast majority of folks in America and in the West who might buy into that kind of stuff, they just don't know. And that's why they should read this book. And so because these are firsthand accounts, this is how the jihadists think, and so they should buy the book if it takes 1,000 years. And if you know a liberal person, please give it to them. I mean, this is the antithesis of liberalism. I mean, if they think that that the jihadists are going to be in favor of gays or in favor of women or in favor of any kind of rights on those subjects that they claim to champion, they're absolutely mistaken. I mean, there's some videos that I've seen of people going around the West Bank, and they're holding microphones up to Palestinians saying, "Hey, what do you think of gay people?" And "Oh, they should all be killed." And I mean, this is the type of mindset that they're teaming up with, and so, I mean, this is it's a lot of it's born in ignorance. But one thing that I noticed volunteering with the State Department that was very revealing. I spent just a couple weeks with them in Africa volunteering for something, and traveling around with them, hanging out with them, listening to them. I got the impression that they're deliberately trying to push BS ideas as a distraction, and what it comes down to is these people that are high up in the government, they have their cush jobs, they're in their cubicle, they're making six figures, they got their pension, and they think, you know what, if I could shovel as much garbage across my desk to distract people from all these issues that don't matter, or don't matter very much, they're less likely to look at the fact that the American taxpayer is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on these salaries. And so the Democrats know this. That's why they chose Kamala, because she's easily manipulated. That's why they pushed Biden, because he's not there. They push these people that don't, and that's why they hate President Trump so much, is because he's a guy who actually gets stuff done, who isn't gonna necessarily listen to bureaucratic advisors, and he's gonna do what he thinks is right, and the bureaucracy is so threatened by him, because that's the danger. That's a big danger. And so when you see people trying to brush, oh, the jihadists are believing in whatever, oh, you're just an Islamophobe, oh, let's push climate change, and let's talk about LGBTQ whatever. It's like, these are issues that really aren't that important. There's not much. Nobody. I've got plenty of friends in the conservative circle that we just, if somebody is gay, or if they believe in a certain other religion or something, we don't care. It's like, I don't care. It's like, this is you live your life, I live mine, but for some reason the Democrat Party has decided, let's push all these issues to the forefront, and they go crazy. and foaming at the mouth over these issues that really people just that live their day-to-day life just aren't thinking about. And the reason what it comes down to, I believe, is that they're distractions. They are distractions because nobody's talking about the vast amount of debt that we're accruing. Nobody's talking about these endless wars and different things that are going on. That, I mean, look at Ukraine. That's the perfect example. That they're pushing this narrative that's total BS. That it's like, okay, I mean, why are we sending billions of dollars to get entangled in another war? It comes down to money. It all comes down to money. I mean, these are all the military-industrial complex is real, and I mean they're coming up with all these distractions and not talking about the issues that are actual threats. I think the jihadists are a far more long-term threat than somebody like President Putin, who's in his 70s, that eventually he's going to die. When he dies, it's done. And I mean, granted, they're a threat to Estonia or something like that, or Poland, but to me in California, the long term, the jihadists are a far greater threat, and militarily, the Russians just aren't anymore. I mean, Iran is a greater threat. China is certainly a greater threat. There's all these greater threats that they aren't talking about very much. And why aren't they talking about China, I wonder? Well, I mean, it's economic. And so, but back on the jihadists, I've kind of gone on a little tangent there. But this is something that's going to be with us for generations. And we need to address it. We need to educate our kids about it. Like I said, if you have a kid, please pick up this book for them, even if they're in middle school. I mean, it's an easy read and it's fun. I mean, it's I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, on the first few chapters?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great book. What I really liked about it is how you describe your personal experiences through the stories of who you met, how they talked, what they said about their families. I mean, that's the way to learn about a society and a culture and an enemy, quite frankly, and our friends too. You know, and this enemy is so outside of our norms in the West, especially in America, in the westernized democracies that we've helped create, like in NATO and stuff. Well, most of them are kind of democracies. They do a lot of tyranny right now and censorship and put people in jail for what they post on Facebook and stuff. But you get my point, you know. So yeah, I think it's a great book. It's a very easy read. Like I said, I sped read it. And I really liked where you went with the book. That's why I wanted to show that clip of the general and get you to talk about this, because, you know, the DOD has spent in the Biden administration over $280 million on DEI infrastructure policy, $280 million. And this general is he's our generation. You know, I consider myself post 9/11, even though I was a major. I mean, all except for one operation of my combat time and planning time and all that is post 9/11 against this jihadi threat. So he should know. He should have learned those lessons. And I think it's critically important that people know that we have generals and admirals and staffs and colonels and lieutenant colonels and majors, all the way to senior NCOs, that don't really understand the threat. You know, right. If somebody like that could say that Kamala Harris is going to make the Taliban leadership cow because of her interracial birth, give me a break. You know, and I don't know why he said that stuff. He could be being paid by the campaign, but what he represents is bigger than that. And that's a challenge, you know. So yeah, I like the way you laid out the book. I think it's a warning sound. It's a warning signal, not to us, but to the kids. That's what I really like about it, is that this is a book you could hand to a high school student or even a junior high student, and it comes from a person that directly experienced it. So it's hard for, you know, the lefties or the big government people like the Dick Cheneys to point their finger at you and go, this Jesse guy, no, he's just a grifter. He's doing this for money, or he's political or whatever. No, we need more people to write down their firsthand experiences about this because of that general. that I just showed. That frightens me as an old guy that spent 30 plus years and 20 of those years fighting this enemy, to know that one of my peers and colleagues doesn't get it after all that time. And you know that he did combat time before he became a general of some sort, either in Iraq or Afghanistan, probably both, being in the Army. That's frightening.
Think about this, Colonel Maness. Right now, the majority of the folks, especially in the Marine Corps, which is a very young branch, the majority of the folks in the Army and the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force and now the Space Force, they were born, or they were toddlers. They were either born after or they were toddlers when 9/11 happened. And so I commissioned after 9/11, and now I'm done. I mean, there's plenty of people that have served and gotten out that their entire service was post 9/11. And so if they're growing up without understanding this, that's such a dangerous element. I did a little analysis of the top 100 military brass members that lead our America's armed forces, and all but one of them that I could find had an advanced degree. And so it was, and it's possible that one didn't or did, and I just couldn't find documentation of it. And I was very curious. So many of them were from these Ivy League schools as well. And so we all see what's happening there on those college campuses. They're going through these woke indoctrination centers. I mean, nowadays there has to be some serious reform on those college campuses with what they're teaching, and parents really need to be more involved, because you're turning your kids through there and they're turning into woke idiots. And to think that our military leadership went through those same schools, I think that there's something to say about that. That's a good source of listening to the propaganda and getting indoctrinated if they're spending several years there before they promote to colonel or to general. And not only that, when they get to general, they have to do politicking. And so they're having, it's very political at that level, as you know, and so if they want to make general, if they want to get another star, they're kissing the butt and playing the politically correct game, and it's at the detriment of our soldiers and our military force and the Western world in general.
You're absolutely right. And the 3 and 4 stars are my peers. That's the year groups that I come from. So they know better. And I think they're doing a disservice to the young kids that they're leading by not being truthful and honest about things like the jihadi threat. Well, we got to take our last break, Jesse. When we come back, we'll hear from President Trump on the jihadis a little bit. And I want to talk with Jesse about immigration reform and where we can go and what we can do if we have good, strong leadership like this Donald Trump guy, who I'm going to be voting for here soon, because absentee voting just started in my state that I'm not going to be around on election day. So if you're voting early, get out there and vote early, and take 10 people to vote with you, and vote for the guy that can lead this country back to strength and establish peace. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show.
I will also secure our borders from dangerous anti-American and anti-Semitic hate. Not only has Kamala thrown open our southern border, and again, she was in charge of your border. Now she's trying to say, well, I wasn't really the border czar. I never heard her disavow border czar before. But open to terrorists and criminals, she's supported unlimited migration from terrorist hotbeds into the United States, especially some of the hotbeds that most hate Israel. Under Boudazar Harris, armies of foreign Hamas sympathizers now march brazenly through our cities. They're literally marching in our cities, and they came from some very vicious, violent parts of the world. And they do not like Jewish people, and they do not like Israel, and they've let that be known, and we are not going to tolerate it. I will not let what happened to Paris, what happened to London, and what's happening to them, too, by the way. That's not over. What happened to Brussels happened here in America. It's not going to happen. We will deport the foreign jihad sympathizers and Hamas supporters from our midst. We will get them out of our country. I will ban refugee resettlement from terror-infested areas like the Gaza Strip. And we will seal our border and bring back the travel ban. Remember the famous travel ban? We didn't take people from certain areas of the world because I didn't want to have people ripping down and burning our shopping centers and killing people.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday, and we're talking about the jihad threat that still exists with author of If It Takes 1,000 Years, Army veteran Jesse Petria. Jesse, you wrote extensively towards the end of the book about immigration and immigration reform. You talk in the book about the warnings from Europe and those kind of things. I mean, the European countries that are our NATO allies, many of them are being taken over by Islamists, and the jihadis are active there. And with the open border policy of the Biden-Harris administration, we've seen more than 200 terror watch list folks that are documented. So that means there's many, many more of them that are inside this country. And then the latest reporting that we're seeing is that there may be up to 5 Iranian jihad assassination teams just here to target President Donald J. Trump, the 45th president, and possibly, more than likely, the 47th president of the United States. I found it, I was impressed that you see the immigration issue for what it is. With the current policies, we are under a threat created by our own hand, right?
Right, absolutely. You know, I interviewed in the book Geert Wilders, who is the member of parliament in the Netherlands, who should be prime minister, although he was frozen out, even though getting the most votes of any parties there. But that's another story. But I interviewed him a few years back and asked him these questions about immigration into Europe and how it's affected his country. And because when Europe is really a window into our future, because they deal with things usually about a decade before we do. I mean, they were being overran by jihadists coming from different countries and other Islamic immigrants from all over, from North Africa, from the Middle East, early on. And Geert Wilders mentioned to me, he said, you know, it changed our country fundamentally. It really it changed us. You have people demanding Sharia law. They don't integrate. They come there and start making demands. That was one of the first times. This was in 2009 that I met with him, and already he was highlighting the fact that the liberals in Europe welcomed them with open arms, and they said, oh yes, this is great, multiculturalism is wonderful, but it's not multiculturalism. It's cultural relativism. It's this dangerous false belief that all cultures are equal. And the reality is that all cultures are not equal. The backwards, fundamentalist culture that puts women in burqa, that chops the hands off of thieves, that murders apostates, that many more crazy barbaric things, is not equal with Western Judeo-Christian culture that encourages people to assimilate and work together and love one another. I mean, it's just really it's such a clash. It's not a clash between civilizations. To quote the Dr. Wafa Sultan, which is actually quoted on the top of the first chapter there, it's a clash between the West or between civilization and barbarism is the way that she puts it. And that's the reality, is that it's going backwards. And we are just darn lucky that our neighbors are who they are to the south, that we don't have an Islamic majority country that we're bordering up against. But you look at countries like Israel, look at countries like Serbia, look at these countries that have fought these people for hundreds of years. In Serbia, they actually have a tower in southern Serbia that is made, that the Ottomans made of Christian skulls that they had captured in a rebellion against the Islamic rule there under the Ottomans. They captured all the rebels, and they killed them, and they beheaded them, and they used their skulls as bricks that they mortared together. And the tower is still there. You can Google Skull Tower, and the Serbs keep it as a memorial because they say, look, we fought these guys before. That's why it was so passionate in Kosovo that they don't let that go. Is that look, we have fought these people. This is something that they think the rest of the world is thinking so short-sighted that we are. When Bill Clinton comes in there and carves up their country and says no, we're going to build a military base there and call it Kosovo, it's really it's a travesty. And these towers are still standing just outside the borders of Kosovo that you can see, or this tower rather. And this is what they're dealing with. This is why the Israelis understand you have to hit them with force. This is why we see them doing these attacks in Lebanon, why you see them hitting Gaza so hard. But they're in reality doing things as surgically as possible, trying to avoid civilian casualties. You see the pager mission. I mean, that type of stuff is phenomenally surgical, whereas the jihadists, on the other hand, they'll hit the Bataclan in Paris and murder hundreds of kids at a concert there or in southern Israel. They'll deliberately attack civilians, and we need to realize that it's like this is what we're up against. We're up against civilization versus barbarism, and we cannot afford to lose. We got to think of our kids. That's the biggest thing, is we have to think of the next generation. If you're listening to this, you're probably already aware of it, but are your children, are they aware? That's why it's so critical to buy this book. If it takes 1,000 years, pass it on to them, and I think you won't be disappointed. And I want to hear from you too. If you after you read it, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. I want this to be a dialogue. So my email is jesse@joinjesse.com. It's pretty easy to remember, jesse@joinjesse.com. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, I think we've got to all work together in this and get the word out. This is exactly like you said. This is a warning.
Yeah, absolutely right. Jesse@joinjesse.com.
Yeah,
hear that
and you can follow me on X as well. I got the address. I don't know if you can see it up here on the. I put it on the whiteboard. So.
We've had it on the screen the whole time.
Awesome,
on the lower third. And it's available on Amazon. Do you have a website too where you can get it, or is it just on Amazon?
Just check out. Go to Amazon and type in "If It Takes 1,000 Years," and like I said, buy it as a gift. Buy it for yourself. Pass it on when you're done with it. Just keep. People need to hear this. It represents about 20 years of research summed up in 200 pages. So.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, thank you very much for spending so much time with us and helping us understand the book. Look forward to having you back sometime on the show to delve even more into policy and current events, especially when it comes to diplomacy and national security, economics, the border. And those kind of things. And I'll see you on Monday. It's War Monday again. Colonel John Mills, retired U.S. Army, is with us. He's been in Taiwan for several weeks. So we've got a lot to talk about and a whole lineup of great guests next week, including G. Van Fleet, the author of Mao's America, is going to be next week, and some other great guests. So we'll see you next week on the Rob Maness Show here at Worldview Tube.